morning, everybody. Very warm welcome. Yeah, my throat is a bit husky this morning. It's to do with petrol. I'll tell you a story later if you go up and tell me that everything's all right now, but it wasn't. If you're a visitor, you are so welcome here this morning, and feel at home. Feel free to be yourself and stand, sing, don't, whatever. You're very, very welcome. And we do film the services, so a little kind of reminder to pit folk. If you come in this part, you will be on film. And I know some people don't like to be on film, so maybe try and stay away from this part for the service. At the end of the service, when you're invited to come forward for anointing, if you want to, we'll turn it off, so you won't be on film for that, and they won't pick up what we're talking about for that. I hear it was really good last Sunday, so thank you for all of you who played your part in making that so good, and for Lisa Jane to feel so welcome here. There were a few technical problems, and interesting how the week before we talked about the intricacies of all the tech. But it was filmed, and we're hoping to get that on Facebook and YouTube soon. So, as I said on Facebook, watch this space. Breathing Underwater is the series we're doing at the moment, and you'll see the title on the screen, Breathing Underwater, and it's connecting the gospel and the 12 steps. Most of you know this, but some of you who are newer might not know this, but during my sabbatical a number of months ago, I had the honour, the privilege of being invited to some open meetings of AA in Brighton, and basically thought, wow, we can learn so much from brokenness, hope out of brokenness, humility, people's self-awareness. And we're on step 4 this morning. And a lot of it in this step is about what might be known as our shadow side. We've got another picture here. And I'll explain more. You probably know a bit about we all have a shadow side. And the question before all of us this morning is, how open are you, how open am I to become more self-aware, not about all our good bits, our strengths, but the things that we're not so aware of, the things that we would like to hide. And why is it that God wants to shine God's light on that shadow? And what's that got to do with freedom? So the question for you this morning, same one for me, is how open do you choose to be? How trusting to God's still small voice in all of that? The Holy Spirit is constantly working in our lives to try and help us in all of this. And when we gather on Sunday mornings as well, in the obvious ways, hopefully through the preaching, the teaching, the singing, the silences, the interviews, the prayers, but also in seemingly insignificant ways. Imperfections, disturbances, when tech goes wrong, when our favourite songs aren't sung, our chats after over coffee. All that stuff, God is constantly at work. Next week, and this is part of the excitement of the series as well, having visitors come. Next week, we have Alan, who I was introduced to by Ant. And Alan, as it says in the news sheet, has been preaching, he will be preaching next week on step 5. He's been involved with AA for over 30 years and is a really experienced sponsor. The wisdom, as I spoke to him, was oozing out of him, and again, just learning from him. Alan and his wife, Lisa, moved to the South Coast after 47 years in London. He ran a consultancy business in international banking and finance, delivering training courses in 45 countries. He's been married to Lisa for 42 years, and they have 2 sons and a grandson. And he's been sober for 36 years, he tells me, he mentions. That's part of his story, which he will share next week. This morning, really excited about this as well. Really thrilled to have Clare Kennedy with us here. And Clare, can we show our love as we... say more about Clare in a little while, or actually invite her to say a little bit more, because Clare is going to be interviewed after the first song. I'm going to have a reading from Psalm 51.
Psalm 51, verse 17. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, do not despise.
I'd like you to got some new toys over in the young people's area. The young people go wherever they like, but there's a little area over there. And I know they're good because they're for little children, but my 20-year-olds couldn't get them off them the other day. So feel free to be there wherever. Great delight, I remember to move the microphone, to invite Claire to come and sit with me. Let's show our love again. You're so welcome here.
Hang on a minute.
That's part of the challenge we like.
Thank you, challenge on again.
And I met you again on my sabbatical when I was in Brighton, and a delight to meet you, and through you to meet people at the drop-in. And after, we're going to have a chat for a bit, then we're going to have another song, and then I'm going to ask Claire more about the drop-in, the charity that she runs in Brighton, and maybe a little bit more about the workings of AA. But I thought it'd be really nice for us to get to know you and something about you. So where do we start? Where would you like to start? How can we know something about you and your life from wherever you want to start?
How long have you got?
As long as you like.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come today, and thank you all for sitting patiently and listening. My name's Claire. I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic addict, and also I'm a very grateful recovering family member. And I suppose that's where it starts, really. That's where my journey started. My transformational journey started 28 years ago. Prior to that, I grew up in Manchester with a very working class family who were very loving and kind, but normalised drinking. So for me to start drinking was quite normal. I took to it like a duck to water, and it just proceeded to get worse, to be honest. But what I did, the insanity of my mental obsession was I would choose distractive partners. It made sense at the time. Don't try this at home, folks. And that's what drew me to Kevin. He was vibrant, he was very funny, and he drank like me. In fact, he drank a bit more than me, which was preferable always in my partners, because unbeknownst to me, I would put myself on a pedestal and think, well, I'm not that bad. I didn't know this at the time. I only know this in retrospect. And we just went down a road of lots and lots and lots of fun, to be honest. It wasn't awful, always. It just got awful at the end. It was progressive. It was very subtle. Addiction is a very subtle illness. It takes pieces of you very slowly. And then before you know it, it's ripping chunks out of you. And I didn't know I was an alcoholic because I didn't drink like Kevin. And I started in Al-Anon. That was really the beginning.
Okay, and actually with one of our local interviews, Hilary was sharing about how she learnt more about addiction through going to Al-Anon and the like, so a little bit of an overlap there. I think many of you, most of us, I wish my mum were here today, and I was saying to Claire, because I was brought up going to bed at 7 o'clock and then hearing the Coronation Street, and brought up with that. And so Kevin, who played Curly Watson 20 years?
20 years, yeah.
20 years. And so that's the Kevin that Claire was talking about. Do you mind saying how you met and all that kind of thing?
Yeah. We met about 20... maybe 30, I know I don't look old enough, about 30 years ago, in a pub, believe it or not. And I'd just come back from living in Saudi Arabia, and I met Kevin, and I've recognised him, but I didn't know where I recognised him from. But what I noticed was there's a lot of women around him, and that obviously was a big attraction. I'm thinking, what's going on over there? And to be honest, now I know that Kevin's quite a shy man. But drink allowed him to be the person that he needed to be famous. People ask him often if he would have been an alcoholic if he wasn't famous. And I think he would have been an alcoholic if he wasn't famous. If it had been a plumber or a painter or decorator or just a house husband, he would have still been an alcoholic. Alcohol was his solution. And I met him and I thought, wow, he drinks like me. And more, you know. And he is, like I say, very, very funny. So yeah, we met on April Fool's Day about 30 years ago. That's a celebration in itself.
Something I learned about him last night, I didn't know, tell me about this if this is right, but you know the Smiths, brilliant band in the 80s and 90s, and I think Kevin was in the forerunner, the band that was the forerunner to the Smiths.
The Paris Valentinos, they were called, and they started in his dad's garage, and the choice came when, as a young boy, because he was involved in youth theatre and a band, and because it allowed him to be somebody he wasn't really, acting and performing is a front for Kevin, it's part of his disguise, and the choice came was, do you want to sign this band and be in it, or do you want 4 episodes in Coronation Street? So we went home and told his mum. It was a typical northern mum, and she went, if you turn down Coronation Street, you will have to leave the house immediately. So there's no choice in the matter.
Oh, wonderful. And he started off as a bin man?
A bin man? Yeah.
I bet you remember that, don't you? Lots of you remember that.
Very intelligent bin man.
A very intelligent, yes. Very academic.
Very academic.
Yes.
Love the stars.
Also couple.
Yeah.
You mentioned his shyness. What do you think is the link between that with him or genuine people and alcoholism? That shadow stuff, I guess, some of that stuff inside.
So for me personally, alcohol and drugs allowed me to anaesthetise the part of myself that I didn't like. So this shadow side that you talk of, I call it my addictive self, and I didn't like that side. From a little girl, I was always seeking God. I didn't know. Nobody. I didn't know anybody in my family who knew God. And I used to go and ask people about God as a little girl. And nobody could talk to me about God. So I knew that there was something that was good that could potentially fill me with goodness. I had one Auntie Flo. She was my great Auntie Flo, and she was a wonderful Christian. She wasn't a preachy Christian. She showed me how to be a good woman, and she was just the kindest of people. So I used to go and play dominoes with her, and we'd discuss God and Jesus, and she just taught me really, very subtly, how to be a better person, but I needed more. I really did need more. So it anaesthetised the shadow side. That's what drugs and alcohol does, often for many of us.
And faith, so you touched on faith. When you started, and I'm making assumptions here, so when you started getting involved in faith, did that help in terms of that addictive side and with your struggles with that stuff going on inside, or did it make it more complicated? Did your faith take years? How was your faith in all of this?
Okay, so I found recovery first. So as a child, very curious, Alice Godfellow, talked to Auntie Flo about him often over dominoes, and then it sort of just dwindled away, and I started getting involved with boys, drinking, drug taking, partying, very much drawn into that money, earning lots of money, being very good at what I did, so I could afford the lifestyle that I wanted. And cut a long story short, it all went pear-shaped, and I decided to go to Al-Anon. Al-Anon introduced me to a higher power, and that higher power, after about 5 years of exploring my own journey as a recovering family member. So Al-Anon isn't about helping the addict. People think it is. And I went to Al-Anon in the hope that they were going to teach me how to teach my husband to drink like a gentleman. They don't teach that, people, if you're just wondering. What they did was they introduced me to me, and they introduced me to God, and they called it a higher power. So I went there to find myself, and I found God. I found people who had God. So my sponsor said to me, because I was always, again, little curious, Claire come out and was always asking about, God, and who do you pray to, and who do you pray to, and, do you call your God Jesus, or, what's your God, and what's your high power? And my sponsor wisely said to me, if you want to know who God is, go and find out more, explore. So that's when I started doing a bit of God shopping, and started going to places of faith and talking to other faithful people and asking them about their faith. And I went to a church and knocked on a door in Manchester. And again, I didn't have, I wasn't a Christian at this point, but I was really curious. I knew that just relying on a higher power wasn't enough. I had to have something solid to anchor my life on. So I went and knocked on this church door. This lovely vicar opened the door, and I said, I've come to find out who Jesus is. Can you help me? And he was like, yes, of course I can. He'd only been there 2 weeks. And he's like, you're the first person that's asked me, come in. So that was the beginning, really. And after having some chats with him, he said to me, I think you've been sent. So I was like, who I? So he said, no, this God that you talk of, this higher power we call him Jesus, I think Jesus has sent you because I think what you have, we can learn from. He said, I've got 18 people in the congregation who have got gambling addictions. So he said, and I believe that this recovery that you talk of, I think it could apply to them. He said, will you talk to them? I was like, absolutely. And I'm sure I'd be the same. We talk to anybody who sits still long enough who wants to know about a 12-step programme. So I said, absolutely. And that was what grew my faith. By going and being of service and learning about, and the quid pro quo was, I taught them about recovery and they taught me about Jesus. Before you knew it, I was getting dunked.
Oh. So you've been around churches a long time. I don't know different churches.
So I've been a Christian for about 20 years. About 20 years. Yeah.
So having met lots of Christians and known some Christians before that and been going to church for a while, what do you think that... I know some people who go to church recognise they're addicted. Some people at AA would say they're Christian. But generally, what would you say that Christians, people within a church, could learn from all the good, all the ways, the workings of AA and the 12 steps? What could we learn? What can we learn?
I think everybody could learn a lot from AA. I really do. And I think everybody could learn a lot from you too. And the way I look at my life is, it's like a jigsaw. There's different people that play different parts in my jigsaw. And what God told me and taught me and shows me actually is that the Lord isn't going to come down and put a plug in the jug. I have to put the plug in the jug or stop the addictive behaviour. And I have to trust that God will do for me what I cannot do for myself. And that is the magical combination for me. I had to put the footwork in. We call it the work in recovery. I had to do the work. I had to go to meetings. I had to be amongst other people who were broken, who were smashed. I was smashed at the end of my... I didn't go to meetings because I thought, I've got a twisted ankle. I went because I was broken and there was no alternative. And nobody, I felt nobody loved me because of the shame and guilt I felt. And I'm sure a lot of people did love me, but what I found in AA was this unconditional love. It wasn't dependent on me stopping drinking or drug taking. It was dependent on me just coming along and being. And I think we've all got a lot to learn about just that little. There's so much to learn from it. From the 12 steps, it's not just AA. So the 12 steps there's 33 different 12-step fellowships in the world. So, we can all learn something from a 12-step plan. I've got a resource list, I'll send to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Why don't it be good to have a song now, pause and have a song, then we're going to invite Clare to come back and we can ask some more questions and some more. But maybe we'll remain seated unless you want to stand for this next song. I asked Clare if, and you should be open, if we can ask a few questions. And I know sometimes being in a group, especially for those of us who feel a bit shy, sometimes in groups, includes me by the way, it's hard to ask questions out loud. But so I'm sure after, over coffee and donuts and stuff, you can have a chat with Clare. But for now, would anybody like to ask just a short question? And I think it could be anything, can it? Yeah? Let's pop your hand up and I'll come to you.
Don't be shy.
I've mentioned shyness there.
sort of on behalf of somebody else, they're and a different type of addiction. What would you advise to somebody who has a kind of lower level of addiction that they're sort of on top of, but they haven't yet reached a point of breaking point where they are happy to go to, in this case, Gamblers Anonymous? What would you advise in that situation?
Thank you for that. It's really tough. Gambling is an absolute prolific illness. It spirals very quickly. What I would suggest, if their loved ones or family members would ever want to come and have a chat, we do have a recovery hub in Brighton, which is in the shape of a little community coffee shop. It's very much like your beautiful church. It's open, it's warm, welcoming. We do everything over a cup of tea, and often we just plant seeds, and we leave the seeds to flourish in God's hands. But for the family members, they can come and have a cup of tea too. We love family members. I'm as passionate about helping family members as I am about helping the addict. But there is a fellowship called Gam-Anon. So Gam-Anon is for loved ones of alcoholics, and not alcoholics, gamblers. So like Al-Anon is for the loved ones and family and friends of alcoholics. Gam-Anon is for the loved ones of the gambler. Because there's lots of things that you have to do differently when you're dealing with addiction. Whereas, I'm sure you've all got the biggest hearts in the world, but sometimes when we're dealing with addiction, there's an element of learning to let go with love. And the let go with love bit is the hardest bit to do. And we have to learn that from other people who've gone before us. So start by going to Gam-Anon. Have a look at their website. They've got some really good literature on there. They've got some videos, they've got talks, they've got podcasts that you can listen to. And listen for the similarities for yourself. And I think the hardest thing I had to do was learn to let go of my husband and let him have his own journey. And if he needed to fall, which my husband did, if he needed to fall flat on his face, then he had to ask for help himself. But as a loved one, if you're doing the work that, again, it's about showing people, not telling people what to do, but showing people what to do. And if they see you're in recovery and that your life's been transformed and that you're relying on God as your source, who knows? God might work in their life. I mean, God is working in their life anyway, but they may choose to do something different.
It does remind me within church, and something that we all learn, or trying to learn, is, and I think it overlaps with what you just said, is that you can't sort people's problems out for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes in church it kind of gets really unhealthy, that sometimes it becomes more about the person helping and codependency and all that kind of thing.
And there is a 12-step fellowship for that too.
And there's a 12-step fellowship for codependency as well. So it's complicated stuff, isn't it? Thank God that we have God to help us work our way through the maze. Anybody else got a question to do with anything we've touched upon? Can be a really difficult one. You might be thinking, was that serious enough? And yes, it is.
Kind of overlapped actually with what Emily just mentioned. So on the subject of sort of codependency, I was trying to get my head around how you probably had to go through your journeys at separate times.
Yeah.
With the codependency, how did you manage?
So it's about getting on your track, because codependency is like this. It's about being entwined in their addiction. And don't forget now, I was using my husband's addiction to avoid looking at my own addiction. And my codependency was rampant. Now, for any of you that don't know what codependency is, it's a real overwhelming need to be needed. And it often manifests in signs of, oh, look, you're doing really good things for people. But really you're not, you're basically jumping in the hole with them. And what people who experience addiction need is, they need empathic approach where people will come alongside them, but maybe stand at the edge of the hole that they're in and say, you know, I see you down there, you know, what's your plan? You know, what do you need to get out of that hole? And encourage them, really. And again, it's the power of example is unbelievable. So, you know, if codependency is a really interesting subject, and for those of you who've never heard of it or don't know what I'm talking about, go online and look at Coda. They've got a really, really good website, and they've got really good talks. They've just updated it all over lockdown. And there's a fellowship meeting actually in our recovery hub on a Sunday at 10 o'clock every Sunday. It's a really interesting subject matter. And what I discovered by stopping drinking, stopping drug taking, getting into recovery myself was that I had a massive codependency issue underlying all of the stuff that I put on top of it. And I had to let Kevin, put using your Kevin, it's not Kevin, it's fine. But I had to let Kevin go on his journey, and I had to go on my journey, you know, and we had to be going in the same direction but on different tracks. That's the difference. So it's about coexisting and not sort of like codependency, enmeshment.
Actually, that overlaps with the sermon in this as well, doing our stuff through other people and not doing our stuff kind of thing. I'm thinking that, I'm not going to put it on the spot and ask you, but what's going through my mind, and we'll have a chat with you afterwards, is I think we need an evening of this, and maybe Kev would come along, maybe I won't ask you now, but something think about, there's so much we can learn through this. Maybe one more short question. I think we said a hand over there somewhere. And the hub, by the way, the drop-in is near St. Peter's Church, if you're trying to find it, just opposite St. Peter's. Or...
Yeah.
How do you believe you would have coped with your recovery if you hadn't found faith? And have you met people who have attempted to recover, and what are your experiences with them if they don't have faith to attempt to recover from addiction?
So the 12-step program is a spiritual program. So it isn't a religious program. So I have met lots and lots and lots of people who do recover from a hopeless, helpless situation. But they do have to be willing to apply spiritual principles to their life. And those spiritual principles of the 12-step program, so you have to be willing to go through the 12-step process. Now, for those of you who don't know, actually, the 12-step the principles that underpin Alcoholics Anonymous come from the Bible. So they originally did use the Bible when Alcoholics Anonymous was first established, and they, you know, utilised a lot of the gifts that are within the Bible to help shape their spiritual program. But what they found in the early days, the founding fathers of AA found that the word Jesus was a barrier for people because of the shame and guilt that they felt. But they changed the word from God and Jesus to higher power, and they grew their fellowship from 100 to 1,000 people within a year. So it freed people up. I mean, if you go through a 12-step program, you have to you will encounter a spiritual experience. And you know, what you choose to call your God is up to you. I've met a lot of people in 12-step fellowship who are Christian. I've met a lot who are Buddhist. I've met a lot who are Muslim. You know, it doesn't matter what people call, but they strongly encourage that God and this God connection is nurtured. I've met atheists who've got it, you know, but they still believe in a high power, so it's a spiritual program.
It's been an absolute delight. Absolutely delight you joining us this morning. We're going to show our love and appreciation, and thank you so much. Can I ask you to come forward as well? And we're going to every Sunday. We yes, yeah. No, thank you. And actually, what I forgot to say is that, and this comes from us, it wasn't suggested at all, but find out more about the charity we drop in, ask Clare, find out about it more online. And if you feel prompted, we never push money kind of giving anything, but if you feel prompted, there are many ways that you can give. And even maybe pop in and...
always a cup of tea.
Always a cup of tea.
Always.
A really good, hot, big cup of tea, I guarantee it. God bless you.
Thank you
Thank you very much. Yeah, every Sunday, so this is a poem from the book, and we're just telling you about comment, getting something different to read it, a different voice. So hear this with fresh ears if you would like to.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Claire, so much. I built my house by the sea, not on the sands, mind you, not on the shifting sand, and I built it of rock, a strong house by a strong sea. And we got well acquainted, the sea and I, good neighbours. Not that we spoke much, we met in silences, respectful, keeping our distance, but looking our thoughts across the fence of sand. Always the fence of sand our barrier, always the sand between. And then one day, and I still don't know how it happened, the sea came, without warning, without welcome even, not sudden and swift, but a shifting across the sand like wine, less like the flow of water than the flow of blood. Slow, but coming. Slow, but flowing like an open wound. And I thought of flight, and I thought of drowning, and I thought of death. And while I thought, excuse me, and while I thought, the sea crept higher till it reached my door. And I knew then there was neither flight, nor death, nor drowning, that when the sea comes calling, you stop being neighbours. Well acquainted, friendly at a distance neighbours, and you give your house for a coral castle, and you learn to breathe underwater.
Let's pause. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, just have a moment of silence to reflect on that, and also to reflect on the invitation at the beginning of the service was, how open would you like to be this morning? Maybe offer, if you choose to, the whole of who you are to God afresh for the first time, and say to God in silence, if you want to, yes, I want to be open. Help me be open. To invite Victor to come forward and to give the readings which will be on the screen.
We got two readings today. First one is James 3:14. But if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Second is Matthew 26:41. Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Thank you, Victor. Wonderful. Title for this morning, A Good Lamp. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory. I can't say that word. I've been trying to say that. Inventory. Or inventory, who cares? Richard Raw, Centre for Action and Contemplation. If you want to sign up for these daily emails, I really recommend them. This was another gem, really illuminating. Please listen to these words. On a personal level, our shadow is all we would not be. Often all our parents told us was bad behaviour. It is all we would improve, all we would fix and get over, move on from. It is hard for us to see because, like a physical shadow, it is always behind us. We find in our shadow what our ego deems negative, and usually it is. Richard Rohr goes on to say, the persona, Greek word for stage mask, our persona, our personality that we take on as we grow up in life, or comes from our very early ages. That and the shadow are correlative terms. And shadow work, what we're talking about today, another phrase he uses is shadow boxing. I love that. Gradually detaches us from our diligently constructed personas, often shaped in the first half of our life. Our stage mark is not bad, it's not evil or necessarily egocentric. It's just not true. Our shadow is what we refuse to see about ourselves and what we don't want others to see. The more we have cultivated and protected a chosen persona, the more shadow work we'll need to do. Therefore, we need to be especially careful of clinging onto any idealised role or self-image, such as minister, parent, doctor, nice person, mentor, moral believer, or president of this or that. These are huge personas to live up to. They trap many people in lifelong delusion that this role is who they are or who they are only allowed to be. Interesting that our shadow is not evil, it's not what might be called sin, but often our shadow is what is behind our sinful, our unloving attitudes and behaviours, and our relational difficulties. Anybody ever had any relational difficulties? The light, on the other hand, this is where we find our hope. It's the Spirit of God wanting to work within us by any means possible, the obvious stuff, but also every way possible, to soften our shadow, to bring into the light our shadow, to free us, and this is it, to be our true self, to live out of the good essence, the tov of who we really are. And this is why we need a good lamp to shine within. And we have one. Thank God we have one in God. The question before us is, do we choose to be open, moment by moment, day by day? What about me and my shadow? And in the spirit of AA, I've been sharing a little bit about my journey over the weeks I've been preaching. I started really, really young in trying to understand who I really am, really young. And I think it's because of my stuff, because of my personality as well, maybe this persona. It wasn't out of my cleverness or my saintliness, but it's been there. And I've been really interested, probably like you, I imagine, in what makes people tick. So I love novels, I love films, I love books, documentaries from an early age. Maybe that's why I went in to study sociology at university, why I became a social worker, why I then trained as a counsellor, and why I ended up in mystery. Mystery, that's a Freudian slip. I'm going to unpack that later. Ministry. There's a bit of a theme of people. Because understanding other people and understanding ourselves, massive overlap, isn't it? And then in my own counselling, I've had quite a lot of counselling on and off over the years, driven by pain and trying to wrestle with stuff, trying to wrestle with my shadow, some of that shadow boxing. And then during the social work training, I love this. I was introduced to something. Check it out, Johari's window. Some of you would have heard about this. And it's a little box with 4 squares. And it's stuff we know about ourselves. Stuff we know about ourselves other people don't know. Stuff that other people know about us that we haven't seen, our shadow stuff, and stuff which we don't know about and nobody else knows about, so really, really buried deep. And then during my training as a counsellor over 4 years, I had to have compulsory therapy. Thank goodness therapists often have to have their own therapy every week for 4 years. And I loved it, but it was really scary at times. It was real shadow boxing stuff. And during this style of therapy, you could start to own your stuff, recognise it. And there was a tendency to project it onto the counsellor. I remember talking about my faith. I was quite new to my faith in those days and thinking, she thinks this is really childish, really. But it wasn't anything to do with what she thought. Actually, it was me. This was me projecting. So trying to work out all that stuff. What is you? What is them? What is us together? Part of my training, this was so uncomfortable, but I enjoyed it as well. We had to have a self-awareness group with other counsellors in training for 2 hours. Sometimes there was a silence of an hour. Can you imagine the stuff going on? But for trainee counsellors, it helped you recognise, that's more to do with me. And other counsellors learning that was to do with them. What it was joint, it was something to do with all of us, working out some of our projections. And as a counsellor, the stuff, the projection that goes on within the room, it's so important for the counsellor to know something about their shadow so they don't project everything onto the client. And also to help the client start to own some of their own stuff rather than project it onto the counsellor. What's me? What's you? Maybe some of it is both of us. Fantastic prep for ministry, and I really don't know lots of ministers who don't have that kind of understanding of the dynamics that goes on. I genuinely thank God for that prep for ministry, because it helps you to work out all the projections that are going on all the time in any group and within any community and within church. So much of people's shadow stuff is projected onto the minister, and we project our shadow stuff onto you as well. What is mine? What is yours? Maybe some of it is ours together. It's helped me stay sane, relatively so, and I think it can be a helpful process if we do start to own our stuff, and it's quite rare that we do this in church, but we do start to recognise our stuff. It's very seductive because you can have good projections. People can think the minister, the vicar, the pastor is wonderful. Wonderful, the father figure, the mother figure I never had. It's quite seductive. Don't get seduced by good projections, but also don't get persuaded by the negative ones. Oh, you've let me down. You're not providing it. So really important for all of us to know ourselves. I cannot recommend the Enneagram, this personality tool, enough. It's for everybody to choose, those who explore it. It has been the most useful tool I have come across, apart from counselling, to understand my shadow side more. It makes me smile because some people are really, really cynical about the Enneagram, and immediately in my mind I'm thinking, I wonder if they're the skeptic, the type 6. But anyway, explore it if you will. It looks at things like the 7 deadly sins. Sounds very old-fashioned, but actually stuff that has been with us and will be with us forever. Pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, sloth, and 2 more, fear and deceit. For the type 2, known as the helper, so interesting learning about the shadow side, because we can be healthy or unhealthy. For us, connection is really important. We're heart people. The connection is really important. And sometimes helpers use helping others actually to make that connection. It can be healthy, but it can also lead to things like codependency. So, again, know yourself. The particular sin for the type 2, we have all of them, not just this one, but it's pride. And it's learning to move from pride to humility. You need help, even though you help people. You're not the best bee's knees helper. You can't get people out of their hole. You can be alongside them sometimes, but you can't solve everything. And life. I've learned so much about my shadow. For example, in my marriage. So much projection goes on in marriages, and sometimes to a really harmful degree. So somebody with a very, very, very low self-esteem and very little self-awareness will be projecting all their stuff onto their partner. And if the partner doesn't know what's going on, it can be the good stuff as well. Not always healthy to do that. But they'll absorb it and think, actually, yes, I am that type of person. I've learnt so much. Have you ever had an argument with a partner or a friend? And why are you angry? I'm not angry, you're angry. It's all projecting. It's so easy to blame the other person, but harder to start owning it ourselves. I used to love boxing. My dad was a boxer. He was in the Navy, in the police, and he used to love boxing. I used to love sparring with my dad. And then I went to university and to karate for a number of years. Loved sparring, just love it. But it can be really painful when, by mistake, you get a thump. Or painful for somebody else when you mistakenly. There's a few stories there. But it's similar with our shadow boxing. It can really hurt. I know the fear. I'm not standing here and saying, I've done it, I'm there, easy. I know the fear, I know the discomfort, I know the pain of shadow work. And I do know the temptation to keep things in the dark, to sleepwalk through life. Denial, something that people in the 12 steps learn a lot about, and we all do it. Jesus spoke about this. Through James, through the letter to James, James says, "But if you harbour bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth." Denial is part of our human condition. Over the years, and this is heartfelt, over the years I have learned to trust the process, the good that comes out of the shadow boxing. And I have tasted, Kate knows this, I have tasted more and more the freedom of doing the work. The shadow has less influence on me. It will always have influence on me, but it has less influence on me. And in all of this, trying to learn to trust God is the light in this work, and being more and more openness rather than depending on my cleverness and strength. How about you? Does any of that resonate with you? Does it make you wonder about yourself? AA, the 12 steps. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Alan, who's coming next week, and he was telling me so much and sharing so much wisdom. And he said that I help addicts do this stage, do this inventory, to write it out, for them to write it out, and then to share it, to speak it out with somebody. And it's about people recognising the tendencies they need to deal with, Alan said, and what the big book calls my defects of character. In our language this morning, helping people recognise their shadow side. The deadly sins, resentments, anger, fears, pride, self-will, self-pity, guilt and shame, relationship issues, sex issues, abuse issues, personal weaknesses and strengths as well, those things that are assets. Alan emphasised, he really encourages people to be honest. If in doubt about anything, write it down. Maybe there's a lesson for us as well about being honest. Richard Rohr says of step 4, this is important. It's not in order to then pull yourself up. Scrupulosity is a religious word. I'm very morally upright. Sort all this stuff out. But bringing your shadow into the light. Then allowing yourself to be pulled up by the power that is greater than you. Ultimately, it's not about working out how good or bad we are, but honest shadow boxing. And it's the noticing the stuff that's the game changer. I find that so freeing. It's the noticing the stuff that is the game changer. So if it's so good, what prevents us, within church, let's say, doing this work, from engaging in this honesty with ourselves, to do this shadow boxing more and more, that makes us grip on to our false persona? And let's be honest, folks, it's so tempting. We all do this to some extent, but it can be rife in churches. I think it can be fear itself. People often don't go into counselling because of fear. My sister, who took her life last year, she always used to poo-poo counselling. And I used to think, I know somebody who could really benefit from counselling. But it's scary. And that's why we can avoid being open before God or with each other. And I think some people with the minister. Some of you are very open with me. I've mentioned again with Anne, some people are very open. But some people, I'll talk one day, I would like to meet one day, and the years pass by. It's a choice. Avoidance, and isn't this natural, avoidance of discomfort and pain? Don't we all want to do that? I love the words of Jesus, the truth will set you free, and I love the words of Richard Rohr, but it can make you miserable first. The work can be painful. And it's often why people who start counselling, this is a pattern, bolt after the first session or the third session. Sleepwalking can be the easier option. Jesus speaks about his disciples falling asleep in Matthew. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. It's also, I think, because, and this is what the shadow is like, we don't want to see our shadow. We really don't want to see it. We don't want to acknowledge it. So it's tempting, Jesus says a lot about this, just to make the outside of the cup look clean. To end up, as in his strong words, he says, looking like whitewashed tombs. Red on the outside, but dead. Bones on the inside. To look clean. And this actually enforces or reinforces this false self-image. Because, and again, an overlap with AA and the 12 steps, self-deceit can be so powerful and we don't know what's going on. It's so clever. The type 3 personality in the Enneagram, this deceit is their main deadly sin. They're called the achiever. They can look so successful in life, they can look great with people, they're often nice in the way they present and look. But actually they can be a comedian. The reason they're so good is because they change and adapt to what the image people they think want of them. And then they start to believe this false image. Oh wow, you're really good at that. Wow. But it's reinforcing the prison. Self-deceit can be so powerful. As Richard Rohr said, seeing our shadow, our failures, our weaknesses can be depressing, so no wonder we sometimes have this on firmly. And this is a biggie. It can be more comfortable, an immediate gratification, a quick fix, quite lazy, we all do it, slothful is the sin word, to blame others in life rather than deal with our shadow. To see, let's talk about church, imperfections in the church. Oh, I wish it was more like that. I wish they did this more. To see imperfections in church members. I wish they were more like that. Because notice what they're like. To see imperfection in vicars, in ministers, and see it all out there because it's much more comfortable than actually doing this stuff. But the hard work is working out what is of you, what is of me, and what is of us. Do you ever in church think, oh, they need to do a bit of work on themselves? Their self-awareness is shocking. That's projection. It could be reality, but actually it might be saying more about you or about me. In the little book that comes from AA as well, the 12-step and 12 traditions that Anne mentioned a while back, they call out this unconscious pattern, and it's called if only. If only this were better. If only they were better. There's some kind of justification which isn't helpful. Jesus, these words are so, woo! Jesus said, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see more clearly to remove the speck from your brother or sister's eye. Work out what's yours, work out what's mine, work out what's ours. Alan told me that he sees so much of this blame game over the 30 years he's been helping people, and it's often used as an excuse. I don't need to change. They do. And this was very powerful when he explained that there's no help in that at all. There's no hope in that at all, because we can't make other people change, even if they do need to. We can only be open to us changing. And the really good news is if we do acknowledge this stuff more and more within us, we can, with God's help, do something about it. Again, in the book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, it says sometimes pride gets in the way of someone doing this self-inventory. I don't need to do that. And in the book it says the problem then is to help them discover a chink in the walls their ego have built up, the defences, through which the light of reason might shine. How well defended are you? How open are you to the good lamp? How trusting? What can encourage us in this process? If you see God as good, loving, then you're going to be more open. I'm going to be more open and more trusting. Having a good theology about who God really is, not this punishing, punitive man with a beard in the sky. Trusting somebody. In the 12 steps, it's the sponsor, opening up to somebody. In church, opening, it doesn't have to be the minister, but whoever you choose, make sure it's not somebody who wants to collude with you to enter into codependence, and make sure that they've done some of their shadow work themselves. Otherwise, you can end up in the hole together. Trusting of the group, Clare mentioned, within AA. Even opening up, doing some of this a little bit, trying with your life group if you're part of one, or other groups that you might be part of. And yes, the Enneagram, another plug for that. Richard Rohr emphasises that all of this has to be done within love, within an attitude of love. This step, he says, is not about judgmentalism of self or others. In fact, it's our inner critic, Richard Rohr says, that can drive us to addiction in the first place. When we internalise that critical parent figure, when we internalise that hypercritical church that we grew up in. This is more about compassion. Compassion for ourselves, and learning more and more compassion through that for the world and for other people. Let me draw this together. A good lamp. Psalm 51. You do not delight, O Lord, in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. My sacrifice, O Lord, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. Our approach to God. And the final quote from Richard Rohr, who I jokingly say is the patron saint of Worthing Baptist Church. The more we are attached to our persona, our full self, bad or good, any chosen and preferred self-image, the more shadow self we will have. And funnily enough, because of this, we absolutely need conflicts. Moral failures, defeats to our grandiosity, even seeming enemies. And I've added in brackets, and an imperfect church. These are necessary mirrors, or we will have no way to ever spot our shadow self. Even if we only catch a glimpse of such shadows, that glimpse may offer graced insight and a moment of inner freedom, and the pathway to even more freedom. Let us pray. Lord, in all of this morning, again in the obvious bits, but also the less obvious bits, thank you that you are trying to speak to us. Thank you that you know how hard it is for us to choose to be open and how scary it can be. So simply, by your Spirit, continue to help us to trust you and to learn to trust each other and others even more deeply. And this we ask in your name. Amen. I'm going to invite you to stand for our closing song. And if you'd like to come forward during this or the post-service song for anointing, then please feel free to do that. Let's stand together if you're able.
Progress.
will carry me safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore. Pray we all have the promise. Now let's close with the Serenity Prayer. And the words are on the screen if you'd like to read them out. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as we would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and ever in the next. Amen. Amen.